So can we start our first session? Are you ready? So the first session is titled White Labeling at Scale Using CI/CD, and it will be presented by Kevin. So please give a big round of applause and welcome Kevin.
Konnichiwa, FlutterNinjas. Hopefully I said that right. Hi, I'm Kevin, and I'm from Code Magic, as you can see on my t-shirt. And I am a solutions engineer, which means I help people set up CI/CD for building their Flutter apps and deploying them to the stores. And one of the things that I do as a solutions engineer is I help people set up white labeling. Now, what is white labeling? So what we're talking about is when you have a single code base which you've come up with as an application. It could be a finance app, e-commerce app, hotel app, and you're going to rebrand it to sell to other customers. And in this screenshot here, you can see there's a finance type of app with different colored background, different logos, icon colors are different, menu colors are different. So when we're white labeling, the most important things that we do is change out the aesthetic things like the fonts, changing the colors, audio files, videos, things like that. Then there's also the configuration side of things, such as maybe a JSON file to load some configuration or a .env file. And these things are used to change the look and feel of the app. Now, we have 3 different types of applications, really. So a lot of you will be building bespoke applications, which means that they aren't really designed to be changed. You build it for the purpose you've been told to build it for, and it's not architected in such a way that you're going to be swapping out colors on the fly or fonts or things dynamically. However, you can do this when you're using flavors or a white label app. Now, you can actually do white labeling with flavors. But normally this means that you're putting all of your assets and icons and everything into the project. And I've come across customers who do this, and they end up with about 50 or 100 different versions of the same application in their Xcode project. And they have difficulty scaling up later on, which I'll talk about in a second. White label apps, however, are designed to have a single code base and run scripts during the build time to change out the things like the fonts and icons and any video files, stuff that you don't particularly want to be sending over the network when you load the app up. Now, I always get asked the question, why shouldn't I use the white label, or why shouldn't I use flavors, and why should I use a white label app? So there's always a bit of a fight there. The main reasons that I can think of is I just said that in a flavored-based app, all of the icons are in the application. With a white label app, we would store our assets and everything in a storage bucket or a CMS system, so something like Strapi or Contentful. And this means as you're scaling up and adding more customers to your system, you don't have to access the repository. You don't have to actually have developer access, and it could be that you're uploading customer assets using some kind of dashboard to do it dynamically, and you'd use an API to interact with your build system. With a white label app as well, rather than having in the flavors type of project, you have everything built in. A white label app uses scripts to change out things like the icons and the fonts, and you can create as many versions as you need. So as you scale up, you might be creating 10 versions, 15 versions, doesn't really matter. Also within your base project, when you're using white labeling, you would only have one scheme and one build configuration, let's say in an Xcode project. Whereas if you're using flavors, you'll end up having 50 versions or 50 schemes and 50 build configs. And as already said, you don't need repository access. Okay, so when I talk to customers who are interested in white labeling, what they'll start doing is building everything manually, and they'll soon find that even with a few versions, this is quite a lot of work. So I've spoken with people who say they spend about 2 hours building each version of their application for their customers. So with only 3 applications, we've suddenly got 6 hours work. When you start scaling this up, say you are now getting really successful and you've got 30 client applications, 30 customers, yes, you're making lots more money, but you've suddenly increased the amount of time that you're spending to manually build these applications. So, the first thing that people think of doing is start automating, which is the right thing to do at that point. And I always tell people to use what works for them best. Normally that means a combination of bash scripts, maybe Python scripts, or even some Dart scripts, and use some tools that will help you do builds and distribution to app stores. So lots of people start using Fastlane, and CodeMagic even provides its own CLI tools that you can use for doing the same sorts of things. However, when you've got one developer doing all of this kind of stuff, it soon becomes apparent that they are a bottleneck. So what happens is that developer that's been put in charge of automating stuff will be the only one that can do it. He's running all the scripts on his local machine. His machine is being used to run the builds, so he's not actually coding anymore. So it becomes a bit of a problem. And that's the time when we say, let's level up and let's start using a CI/CD approach to building and distributing the applications. Using CI/CD will free up that developer's time, free up his machine. It'll allow you to build applications in parallel. It's going to give you a maintained environment. It may even give you access to machines such as macOS-based machines that you don't have access to normally. There's lots of developers out there just using Linux or Windows-based machines. It's going to start encouraging best practices such as tests as part of your workflow. So best to make sure that you're distributing quality applications. It's also going to make distribution to app stores a lot easier. So if you're pushing out to Google Play or to the App Store or Firebase App Distribution or any other base system, this is something that the CI/CD platform can help with. And probably the most critical thing when it comes to white labeling is having access to an API that allows you to automate functions such as adding secure environment variables, starting builds programmatically, monitoring build statuses so you know where your app is in the build cycle. When I advise people to use an API, they can use it to start builds by passing in a payload to identify a client. So if I want to start a sequence of clients, so the first 10, I could pass them in an API call and pass in a JSON payload. In this example here, I'll be sending in the client ID. And I've also mentioned that we can use this API for the build status and adding and removing variables as we need them. So when you're looking at doing white labeling with any CI/CD provider, just check out their API and make sure it provides these functions for you. One other useful thing that we've just launched at CodeMagic, which is good for us when we're doing white labeling, is custom build inputs. And this allows us to test our workflows and define our own custom field. So in this little example in here, I've just added a client ID field, and if I want to test the client build 2 or 1, I can just put a number in and start a build manually. Okay, so when we set up a white label workflow with CI/CD, your CI/CD provider is going to sit in the middle here. Obviously, I'm going to put CodeMagic here because that's what I'm familiar with. But the most important things that it should be able to do is interact with your Git repository, so it can clone the base code to the build servers. You're going to need access to your customer's assets, which will be downloaded to the build machine when we start a build. API access, as I've already explained. The ability to push out to different stores, and distribution internally to people like testers or other stakeholders. So you can give them a Slack notification, an email, or some kind of QR code where they can download different versions of the app. One important part of the white labeling process is getting all of these assets together. And I will normally create a zip folder that contains my images and icons. And I use Amazon S3 or Google Cloud Platform to store them on. And when I start a build, I'll just pull them down from there. So there's 6 steps that we recommend when white labeling. So the first one is to initiate the build using an API request. And that's when I'll pass in the customer IDs that I want to build. I'll then clone the application down to the machine. I'll then download the assets from my CMS or secure storage bucket. I'll then run a series of scripts that replace the assets in the application, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. We'll then run the build, and that involves things like code signing, so we need access to provisioning profiles and iOS distribution certificates and Android key stores. We will get those items from CodeMagic's environment variable storage, which is configured within the web UI. And then once we've successfully built the app, we'll go through the publishing phase. I say stores here, but as I said before, it could be internal distribution or external distribution. So let's have a quick demo. So my base application looks something very simply like this. I'm not a Flutter expert. I'm learning still, so forgive me. It's very basic. I've got a picture at the top, some text, and a button. And to configure this basic application, I've got a simple project. And I've got my main.dart with the Flutter code in there. I have a settings file. And I'm loading in my settings theme from this file here. Now, down at the bottom, you wouldn't typically have information like this coming or being hard-coded in the app. I've just done it for simplicity's sake. But I'm using my settings.json to set things that don't change very often, like the name of the hotel is not going to change, primary color is not going to change, font family. And that's used to drive the settings of the application. I then have a YAML configuration file. And in here, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but we have some reusable sections at the top that we can use in other workflows. Then we have a section where we are running various bash scripts to change things like the bundle ID according to the client ID that I pass in during the API call. I'll have other scripts here that change the font and the icons and whatever else that I want to change in that application to make it customized. Now, during this workflow, also we do the building and signing and distribution. And just so you know where I store my assets, I've got an Amazon S3 bucket here, and I've just got a few assets for each of my clients. So I've got 4 clients in there, and I'll just pull those down from the server as I need to. And as I add more clients, I will add more zip files into this directory. Now, when we run the white label workflow and then distribute the application, we should then get different versions of it. So I'm going to try connecting my iPhone to the screen. Looks like we've got liftoff. And then once I've run my build, you'll see I've got 3 different versions here. And what I've customized is the color of the icon and the splash screen color. And as you notice, it's got a different image. I've pulled in a different name of the hotel, and each version is simply customized with different color, different picture. And number 3 is the red version. There you go. Now I'm going to try and just update one of these on the fly by running a very simple script, which is just going to first update the assets on the server. So let's see if this works. So I'm just going to try and run. Now we have to find the name of the script. So I've got some shell scripts in here, and I've got one here called upload new one, and that's just going to copy up a new zip file. So let's just quickly run that. Now, in the real world, you'd probably be using some kind of dashboard. A lot of our customers build their own systems for customers to upload their own images. Let's see if that works. All right, so that's going to copy up an alternative version of the app, and then we're going to kick off a build. So in the real world, as I said, the developers will provide systems for their customers to update their own files and whatever they like on the fly. Well then, now I've uploaded that file, I'm going to start a build just of a simple one. Oh. Let's see if that works. Right. And as you see down here, it's kicked off a build on CodeMagic, and I've put some monitoring into my script to use the API to poll the status of the application. So the first one, we can see it's in the queued state. It's going to try and check that status again in about 30 seconds, and hopefully it will progress to the preparing state, and then it should then go to the building state. So we'll leave that to do its thing, and just so you see what's happening in CodeMagic, we'll open this up. So you can see here, it's now going through the stages of white labeling the application. So it's changed the iOS app name, it's changing the splash color, and then it should progress through to the other items. So I'm just going to let that continue, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. So that's the general idea of white labeling the application and starting the build and changing everything. Now, when we're building a lot of applications, when we really scale up and we start talking about building, 150 or something applications, this is where we need to start thinking about optimizing the CI/CD workflow. So a customer came to us not long ago, and they said that they've got 153 builds, each taking about 13 minutes each. And as you can see, that's 1,989 minutes. And at the time, they were using one of our M1 concurrencies or build machines to build all of those apps, which took them 33.1 hours, which is quite a long time. So what we told them is they need to increase the concurrency. And if you do that by a factor of 5, so add 5 machines to your pool, you can reduce that to 6.6 hours. And then obviously if you go to 10 machines, you get down to about 3.3 hours. Now, things have moved on since this. We're now on the M2 infrastructure. So you're probably going to reduce that by about 15-20%. So you get a bit lower. And I guess as we go forward in the future, if we ever get the Apple Silicon M4 machines, then we should see some more reduction in build time then. Other things that you can do to increase the build speed time is taking advantage of caching. So you can cache things like your pods or anything that you're using as a dependency, and that's simply configured in the YAML file with this syntax here. And another great feature that we have in CodeMagic is something called post-processing. So when you upload a binary to Apple and you've got something like release notes, usually you would have to wait for the actual binary to be available in test flight before you can add the release notes. Now with CodeMagic, once we know that you've uploaded the binary to Apple and they've confirmed it, but it isn't in test flight, we'll hand over the process to another machine and we'll finish that build. And then in the background, we'll upload the release notes once Apple tells us that it's ready to receive the release notes. So basically, without this, you might be waiting 45 minutes for the whole build to finish. But with post-processing, it might take 30 minutes, and then your machine is free again, which is really valuable if you're running hundreds of builds, because you want those machines to be freed up as soon as possible to get on with the next build. Okay, so let's see if that build finished. So that's the live build. It's gone into post-processing. So it's possible that it's not published it to the device yet. But if it hasn't, that's fine. What it will do is push down the updated version. It's just got a different image, different icon, and just changes the version easily. Now, it says it's finished. We'll see. I'll finish off, and then we'll see if it comes through to the device as I'm just going through this final slide. So, everything I've talked about today is available in the GitHub for CodeMagic. So if you want some samples of the scripts that we use, and it is a Flutter specific sample project, so it could be useful for you, take a picture of that and check it out. Okay, everybody got that? Right, going. Gone. And then if you want to contact us, then you can find us on the web, codemagic.io. If you want to connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, my details are there. And if you want to book a demo, there's another QR code there if you are interested in setting up any kind of white labeling or CI/CD in general. Okay, the update hasn't come through to the device. It could be a few minutes, so you'll just have to trust me that that will work. If you've got any questions, you can... Have we got time for questions now?
Yes, you have 8 minutes.
Oh,
for
okay,
Q&A
did
session,
very
so,
quickly.
yeah.
So if anybody's got any questions now, feel free to ask. If not, you can catch up with me in the speaker lounge later on.
So we have, okay.
Oh, one question.
I will bring a microphone to you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very informative. One question about you still need separate certificates and stuff like that for the App Store, right? As far as I know, there's no way to automate that part, or is there?
Well, what we normally do is we will set up, and I actually skipped this. This is probably why I finished 8 minutes early. This is fine. What we have is in the CodeMagic interface, we will have a section here for each client where we store their certificates and provisioning profiles. So you'll see here I've got client 1's specific details, and I can sign the application using those, and there's the details for client 2 and 3. We're actually doing an improvement on the UI for this just to make it a bit tidier, so it'll be collapsible sections for each group. These groups are imported into the CodeMagic YAML, so all of the settings for the specific customer will be loaded dynamically when we tell the build to build for client 001. It will then download the specific set of variables for that specific customer. While we're talking about variables, thanks for this question, by the way, what we can do, and it's really important when you're doing this kind of stuff at scale, is we can manipulate the variables. So if I want to delete, so let's got vars underscore delete, I can get rid of everything from the UI by a simple script. So all of this stuff that I'm doing here is available in the documentation on how to interact with the variable system. And if it's not in the sample project that we've got up there, I'll put it in, but I think it is there. So once they're all deleted, we can just refresh this view, hopefully. Go back to environment variables, and we've emptied out. And say I'm adding 10 new customers a week. This is going to make it easier than coming into the UI and adding everything manually. So as long as I've got access to things like API keys and signing certificates, which you should get from your customer, because one of the worst things you can do is start adding 50 or 100 versions of the same app to your own app store. If you do that, you're running the risk of getting your account banned. And I've spoken to customers who have had that happen. So not very frequently, but it is a risk, because what they see is that the core code is the same. They're not really taking into account that you're changing colors and fonts and things like that. And then I've just got another script. I can add all of these back. So we'll just put those back in. Okay, any other questions?
Like, there's no API on App Store Connect for creating those different variations.
On App Store Connect?
Yeah, is there an API to create a new, so to say, flavors, so I can get it automatically, or like certificates?
You mean generate the certificates?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you don't have it, you can use our CLI tools, and there's a special flag --create, which will create and renew the certificates as required. So it's possible to do that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem. Anybody else got a question? I've got one more thing I probably want to mention. If not, anybody?
Any more questions? We have a few minutes more.
Okay, I'll come up with my own question then. So one of the most common things people ask me is, how do we create the initial apps? So on the App Store and Google Play. So with Apple, it's pretty easy. You just need to set up your bundle ID and you're ready to automate the process. With Google Play, however, and you've probably all been through this pain, you have to create the app, you have to answer 10 million questions, you have to upload 10 million screenshots, and it's quite painful. There isn't an API provided by Google, unfortunately, to create new applications, and the best thing I can think of at the minute is to use some kind of automation software, something like Selenium or Playwright, to just automate clicking buttons and creating the app for you. It's something I'm thinking about playing around with and seeing if I can make it work. Once you've got the app created in Google Play, then you can update screenshots and things. You can use something like Fastlane to update the screenshots, and you can use CodeMagic to fully automate the process from there. Okay, if there's anything else, then I'll meet you over in the speaker session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you very much for the insightful session and Q&A. Let's give a round of applause to Kevin again. So we will now take a 15 minutes break. So during the break, you can visit the Ask the Speaker corner to talk more about this session to Kevin, and come to and also visit sponsor booth to communicate with them. So next session is going to start at 11:25. So thank you.
Unfortunately, we are running out of some coffees. So hold on. If you want a coffee, hold on until lunchtime.